Hello everyone. Thank you very much for coming along this morning on the last day of the conference and Friday the 13th as well. My name's Claire Harrison and I work for Cambridge Assessment English in the assessment department. My team's called the Teacher Development and Curriculum team, and we're responsible, among other things, for CELTA, or at least the academic aspects of CELTA. That's the syllabus that form the content, the assessment, moderation of candidate portfolios, and quality assurance generally. And can everybody hear me? Do I need to get closer? Or is that all right? Lady at the back, yeah, all right? Good, thank you very much. So yes, this presentation is being filmed. So, you know, if you want to do your hair or anything like that, you have been warned. Okay. So, every year, tens of thousands of candidates take CELTA at over 300 centres in over 70 countries. And we've just done some research sort of before Christmas time, going into January, looking at 600 ELT advertisements for jobs, and we found that specifically 72.4% of those we looked at contained a reference to CELTA somewhere in them. So employers are requiring CELTA, and actually in the UK that rises to 88% of job advertisements mention CELTA. So obviously in terms of candidate demand and employer demand, it looks like CELTA is still relevant. We can all go home. Obviously, CELTA's been around for more than 50 years. It was developed in the 1960s at International House in London for a very specific need. They needed teachers urgently, and there wasn't really any teacher training course around, so they devised their own. So it was born out of practical necessity to find reliable teachers quickly. I think we're still in that situation today, that we need reliable teachers quickly. The British Council estimates that by 2020 there'll be 2 billion speakers of English in the world, and actually that the number of non-first language speakers of English will outnumber those speaking it as a first language. We know that countries who speak English well do well economically, and obviously there's a great desire to increase and improve the level of English of people in different countries. So I think we're still in a situation where there's a global shortage of English language teachers. So teacher training of some kind, at least, is still relevant. The course that was developed in the 1960s actually hasn't changed very much since then. So as you know, it views language as communication, that interaction is very important. The central tenet is teaching practice and feedback on that. Includes observation of experienced teachers and input sessions on language and methodology. So it's a very practical course integrating theory and practice, and actually I suspect it was probably rather ahead of its time, which is why it hasn't really needed to change in the last 50 years. Having a look at initial teacher education generally, we see that what's included in CELTA is included in most initial teacher training. So the OECD conducted a study looking and describing independently initial teacher training in lots of different countries, and points out 3 key factors that are included: subject matter knowledge, geography, history, in our case English, teaching techniques obviously, and practical school experience are all features that are included in pretty much every initial teacher training course. CELTA's no different. Looking as well at what's happening in the UK, Sir Andrew Carter conducted a review of initial teacher training in the UK in 2014-15 and came up with some points of what best practice was in the different kinds of courses that teachers in the UK can do when they train for the first time. Again, we see subject knowledge, subject pedagogic knowledge, how you teach that subject, observation of good teaching, which of course we have in CELTA, high quality mentoring. Of course, we also have in CELTA with teaching practice and assisted lesson planning and feedback and so on. An emphasis on planning and structured planning. A focus on assessment. I think in the UK they would like teachers to focus more on assessment. I think we deal with it briefly in CELTA, as it's such a short course in comparison with all the initial teacher training that this actually refers to. And in initial teacher education in the UK, they feel that it's particularly good to have an understanding of research and undertaking your own research. And of course, I think this is rarely something that's covered on CELTA. And might be something we could consider. Of course, it is included in Delta, which follows soon after CELTA in a lot of cases. So we are covering it, but perhaps not in CELTA. So it looks like CELTA resembles teacher training in other fields, in other areas. This research is 2014-15. The previous one I mentioned is 2010. So nobody seems to be really doing anything differently to us. But the world is changing around us. So, as I mentioned, countries doing better economically when they speak better English. More and more countries are introducing English earlier into the school curriculum, which obviously means that it's not just adults. There's a lot of young learners as well learning English. Clearly, there's been an explosion in digital technology, educational technology, which is enhancing face-to-face teaching and also making possible teaching in situations which are remote, which is changing the way people are teaching, as well as online access to reference materials, authentic or otherwise, obviously changing how students want to learn for themselves and changing what teachers can access as well. And I think technology is giving us the opportunity to be more individualised in what we do, and I think that's reflecting out into other things we do. We want specialists, we don't want general. We want to know that we can do something that suits exactly our needs. So English for academic purposes, English for business, and so on. I think there's going to be more tendency for that to be a requirement. And of course, there are advances in neuroscience now as well, so we're starting to understand better how people learn, and very slowly, I think, this will start to impact on the way that people teach as well. For example, we know now that learning styles are not fixed traits, that they are things that we drop in and out of, and we've altered the CELTA syllabus accordingly. Knowing that all this is going on in the world, we felt it was necessary not to stand still. We know that CELTA is doing well, that people are recognising it very widely, that they recognise its quality, but will that always be the same if we stay the same? And we undertook some research a little while ago now, involving a number of stakeholders to try to understand what they think about CELTA, and then maybe give us direction of what we should do to future-proof it. So, in the survey, we did some desk research first, and then we worked out who we wanted to talk to. We talked to 72 centres in 16 countries. We talked to about 240 tutors, including assessors and senior assessors in 50 countries. 1,500 CELTA candidates, I think most of them had just completed, some were still completing the course. 100 nationalities, 70 first languages, 300 potential candidates. We were running an English language teaching MOOC at the time, and so the people who were doing that were interested in English language teaching but not necessarily qualified, and we were able to ask them questions about if they were going to do a course, what they would do. We also did some employer interviews, people who require CELTA, people who don't require CELTA, and 27 competitor candidate interviews, so talking to people who had done other people's qualifications to see why they had chosen them. The good news is there was very high satisfaction and very little appetite for change of any kind in any stakeholder, really. 87% of the candidates said that CELTA prepared them very well for teaching. And I have a couple of quotes up there from people. They like that it's practical, rigorous, they like the way the trainers dealt with them, and the real-world opportunity to teach. And actually 99% of centres and 83% of tutors say they're happy with the content as well, which is also extremely high. And employers, obviously very important in the whole chain, rate CELTA graduates very highly as well. So in comparison with others, so I'm not sure whether that's people with nothing, no qualification, or people with other qualifications, they said that CELTA graduates were more organised, were good at planning lessons, they had better understanding of terminology and grammar, of classroom management, better teaching techniques and ideas, more confidence, making them better teachers. And they also had a perception that if someone had chosen to do CELTA, that they would perhaps be more committed to teaching than if they were doing a short course or an online-only course. Of course, people had suggestions of what we could change and what was needed, although not in as great a number as we were expecting. So one area focuses around the teaching of young learners. So obviously, as we talked about before, lots more young learners learning English. So obviously the preparation of teachers for teaching young learners is going to come up as a factor. Interestingly, candidates expected and wanted to teach adults, possibly teenagers, but they were doing CELTA because they wanted to teach adults. And most of them do go on to teach adults. So 74% of them said, yes, I am teaching adults. However, half of them were also teaching teenagers, and a third were teaching very young children, so not at all what they had expected or wanted. So they may not have wanted to teach young learners, but they were teaching them. And half of employers said that they wanted CELTA to focus on young learners. That was a need for them. And some of the tutors said they didn't think that CELTA was preparing their candidates for everything that they were going to have to teach when they got out of doing their CELTA. So they particularly mentioned young learners, large, unmotivated classes, and there were other mentions of different kinds of English language teaching as well. And some of the CELTA graduates who had finished the course said that with hindsight, maybe a focus on young learners might have been useful. And they also mentioned one-to-one teaching, exam classes, English for academic purposes, so other kinds of specialist English that they probably then went out and were asked to teach immediately. So what do we do with that information? CELTA is a course for teaching adults. It's 120 hours. There's no desire for anybody to spend any longer doing it or running it. I don't think we can really do justice to young learners and adults on the same course. And we had 2 teaching qualifications for teaching young learners. We had CELTIL, which is the young learner equivalent of CELTA, which was a 4-week course. I think discontinued in 2010 because of very low candidate numbers. And the young learner extension to CELTA, which was an add-on to CELTA, so you could do the equivalent of 2 extra weeks after finishing CELTA to prepare you to convert, in a way, what you'd learned about adults to teaching children. Withdrawn in 2016. Oh, I'm sorry. Because of very low candidate numbers. And I'm afraid to say, I think there's partly this idea that people want to teach adults, so they're not choosing the young learner course to begin with, or they don't know, and CELTA's the one with the recognition, so they're going for CELTA rather than going for CELTIL. Yeah, it's almost like CELTA's cannibalised the other 2. It's eaten them up for breakfast because it's so widely recognised. And I think with the young learner extension, nobody expected you to have a qualification in teaching young learners, so why would you pay to do it? You learn it on the job. But it's a shame. It's a great shame. What is the solution? I'm not quite sure. I don't think we can make this mishmash of young learners and adults on one course. We can't make the course any longer. You could, if you have experience, talk to your trainees about teaching young learners and make references. You could show them videos. It won't be the same as doing a course where you're actually teaching them. I guess an alternative might be additional modules. Now we've got more digital opportunities, something online, and our digital team will look at all of this, I'm sure. What could we add? What would people be prepared to pay for as well? And maybe in this way we can revitalise and bring back young learners. But I don't think we can shoehorn them into CELTA. I don't know what you think. I'll leave that with you. Another thing that people said was that they wanted, as well as something for young learners, they wanted a greater focus on digital teaching. So a third of employers said they want a greater focus on digital, although they recognise that CELTA can't prepare for everything because things change in terms of technology and each school's going to have something different. They said they wanted their candidates to know something about using the interactive whiteboard, about designing digital lessons and using the digital elements of course books. And about 20% of centres and 20% of tutors also said something about that. Which is interesting because we went to the CELTA syllabus, which all courses are based on, and actually it's really open. You can use whatever materials and resources you like to teach on CELTA. I think pre-2015 we didn't specify anything particularly digital or technology-wise. We just said any resources that are appropriate. In 2015 we popped in educational technology to remind people you can do that. And we've just redone the syllabus now. The 1st of April it came out. Don't laugh. And we've tried to beef it up again. So we've put including computer and technology-based resources, including technology and digital, including digital, just to remind people that they can do this. We looked at whether we could put this into the assessment criteria, but we just felt like we're not at that point yet where every CELTA centre has enough technology that we can say, definitely tick, you've done this. So it's not in the assessment criteria. But obviously it's up to us as tutors to include a variety of different materials, including digital, where possible. And then perhaps we won't get these comments about, there isn't any digital in CELTA. Coming out of the survey, and also coming out of the information that we gather from candidates generally, and you've heard this before in other talks, we've got some interesting first language information. So in 2005, we had 75% whose first language was English of the candidates taking CELTA, and only 25% whose first language was not English. Go on 5 years, we go to 65-35. Go on again, 50-50 in 2016. So that's a difference across the world. So we have more and more candidates whose first language is not English taking CELTA. I actually managed to get the 2017 data after I'd written the presentation, but before I came here. And it's pretty much the same. I think it's 51-49, something like that. But it's hovering half and half, basically, which is obviously a difference from the original CELTA course in the 1960s, or even in the 1980s, or even in the last 15 years since I've worked at Cambridge English, quite a change. Something else that's changing is candidates' experience when they come on a course. So I looked at data in the early 2000s, and sort of 15-20% of candidates said they had some experience of teaching already. Looking at 2016, which I must say is only partial data, because candidates now complete this information in an online form, and they don't all do it. So we have to take it carefully. But about 60% had said they had some teaching experience. 70% of those were non-first language candidates. And they had a fairly even spread, so they 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, up to more than 11 years experience. The non-first language candidates were spread out in that way. But you can see even 50% of the first language candidates who answered the KISS data had experience, but they were more in the 1 to 2 years camp. So you've got quite mixed CELTA courses now, where they were probably a lot more homogenous in the past. We have a qualification for people whose first language is not English and who have experience of teaching. It's called ICELT. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of it. Yay! It's a fantastic course. People who have heard of it say it's the gem, the hidden gem. Yes, lady at the back with a thumb up. It's a wonderful course. You have to be about B2 level of English. You have to have about 500 hours of teaching experience, and your learning is not with specialist teaching practice groups, it's with your own classes. So you're improving your ability with your own learners, which is what makes it so fantastic. It can't be run in a short course format because you are teaching your own classes. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it doesn't have such take-up as CELTA does. Maybe that CELTA's just eaten it for breakfast again because people are drawn to CELTA because of its recognition. And people haven't heard of ICELT, and it's not as widely offered. So even if you wanted to do it, you might not be able to. But we have it. And we also have two newer qualifications, CELT-S and CELT-P, Certificate in English Language Teaching Primary and Secondary, which are online courses with a little bit of teaching practice included, and with a slightly lower language level requirement. They're quite new, so we have yet to see whether CELTA will eat them up for breakfast as well. But I think they're a slightly different audience, so I'm hopeful that they will survive and be relevant to the people they're designed for. So we have other courses. However, I don't blame people for wanting to take CELTA. That's what's recognised, that's what has prestige, that's what people know about. And having this mix of people, actually, maybe that's not a problem. Because centres design CELTA courses based on the syllabus, which I hold up. I think we forget about this because we've got our courses and we're used to running them, and we don't look back at this. And actually this is a very good document and very broad, and you can do a lot with a CELTA course that's not quite the traditional one that you might think of. So yes, you can design your course to suit whoever's doing it where you are. I used to work as a CELTA trainer in International House Budapest, and they always had a mix of candidates, even in the 1990s. Hungarian speakers, all other languages, English, half and half. Trainers were all mixed up as well. And it actually worked quite well as a complement because the non-first language teachers were able to explain and help in terms of language awareness. And they enjoyed having the first language speakers to learn from new expressions, things that are more intuitive. And the level of experience with teaching practice being open-ended, not really a problem. You can feed back at any level. We know of courses where candidates are very experienced. I know Jason talked about that in his talk, Jason Anderson, if you went to that earlier. The Ural-Federal University in Russia, for example, has a course for their teachers who are non-first language experienced, and they tailor the course to suit them. We have MA programmes with CELTA embedded into them. King's College London is collaborating with International House London to embed CELTA in their MA programme, and I think they mainly have Chinese teachers who are doing that. So there are lots of different variations of CELTA. I know there's a talk following this one about the embedding Oxford Brookes and British Study Centres embedding CELTA in an undergraduate programme, which I think would be really interesting. So lots of different ways that you can do CELTA and try to address all these different needs if you have these slightly different kind of groups. Ah, yes. Another question we asked was about modes of delivery. So should we change how CELTA is delivered? It's mostly done face-to-face. We have a blended learning option where the input is online, but teaching practice is still face-to-face. Now, potential candidates thought it would be great to do a CELTA fully online. People we asked in our survey said, no, not really. We think that it's much better where people collaborate. CELTA's not designed to be done fully online. The peer assessment, the working together is what helps people to learn, and we shouldn't change things. So actually, the face-to-face element is really important. So we've got different opinions again. There were some suggestions from tutors that we might move things online, assignments, lesson plans, that kind of thing. that we might put videos of experienced teachers online, and that we might have people looking at material online outside of the course and then talking about it in a flipped approach in the course, that might be a good way to use technology. We have looked at whether we can do CELTA fully online. We've had a little pilot with International House London. I think there are still teething problems. It's something we have to think about, I think. We'd be foolish to ignore what people are saying, but at the same time, I don't think we're in a rush to get there either. So yes, I think we're in an unenviable position, or an enviable one, whichever way you look at it, of having a qualification that people are very happy with and don't really want to see changed. But the world is changing and people are going to want something different, and I don't know whether my successor will stand here in 50 years and say, it's the same as it was in 1962. We're going to have to look around. I think we're at a crossroads. We need to look at all the options and see what is the best thing to do with CELTA. We have lots of questions about what we should do. Any suggestions greatly received, and I have a couple of minutes if anybody has any suggestions or questions right now. I'll go to Jason first.
You mentioned, thank you for that, Claire, it was really, really interesting and useful, the idea of no demand for a longer CELTA. Because obviously within the literature, there is a demand there, and at least a theoretical demand that these courses must be longer to prepare them in a meaningful way. But one suggestion I'd like to make that's hopefully positive is the idea of a post-CELTA module where they get a provisional qualification. There's an online module that supports either novice or experienced teachers on CELTAs, and they maybe, for example, have 12 months to complete it, and that would add either extra credits for the qualification, or possibly kind of rubber stamp a CELTA as kind of CELTA something plus, so that both they can work out how to appropriate from, as I was saying in my talk, from the CELTA for their context, both the experienced ones who are going to very different contexts, the massive growth in developing countries, and also for the inexperienced teachers who also find themselves in context teaching younger learners, which they can experience. And that has to be there. The young learner expertise can be shared there. There can be, in that module, there can be people talking about it, sharing about it. There is the possibility of even uploading candidates, uploading little bits of lesson where they've tried to do something. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think irrespective of whether the CELTA could be moved to 6 weeks, which some of us would argue would make it significantly more useful, but the idea of actually at least having something online which is then more developmental for this massive increase in experience of people taking the course that was designed for them.
Yes, I think that's very useful. I'll summarise that because of the film. I don't know whether they'll have heard it, that you're suggesting an online module which might cover some of the things that people are raising as issues and take them beyond CELTA once they get into work, when they realise this is what I actually need to know now for what I'm doing. Is that a reasonable summary? Yes. Yes.
You mentioned the idea of fully online and video TP. I was at International House London. My name's Jacqueline Douglas, and I was the person who, although TP was properly face-to-face and the tutor was sitting in the corner as normal, I was the person who then got a clip of it, a recording of it, and I did shadow feedback. And we had lots of discussion about it at that time, and we just worried that it's different. I couldn't always hear the students properly. I knew, it was interesting, I knew one of the trainees because she worked in our staff room as the resources assistant, and she was doing her CELTA. And knowing her and her personality in the staff room, I didn't get that at all.
Right.
At all. So that was an interesting one. I wouldn't have noticed that with the others because I didn't know them, but I did with her. So the discussion that I was having with my colleagues was, it's possible. So if you're in Kazakhstan in the middle of nowhere, you could do your CELTA, but would employers look to see which one you've done? And would there be kind of like a second string CELTA? Oh, they did the video version. I don't know.
Yes.
It worries me.
So this is for the film again. This is about fully online CELTA and the differences in the feeling almost of what you can pick up on a video versus what you can pick up in a room. And yes, I think that's what we've heard. It's something we'd have to look at very carefully. I had a lovely conversation earlier this morning about, actually, if you're using technology, maybe you should be doing something really different with it. You shouldn't just be trying to replicate what you do face-to-face online, that it doesn't really work, that something completely different could be done. virtual reality, or, you know, all kinds of different ways of using technology might be a better way forward. Thank you very much for that question. Yes?
I know it might sound a bit utopic, but as a teacher trainer and a former trainee, I'd love to have a post-CELTA, Delta, etc. mentor. Because when we're thrown into the teaching context, there are so many things that come up from our teaching. So maybe film my lessons, send it to my tutor, and then online I could probably get some feedback. And some tutors do this anyway, out of good character.
Wow.
In fact, it would be nice to have that option as well, to have my lessons observed from my current context, by my CELTA tutor. That would probably be useful.
That sounds like a fantastic idea. Ongoing mentoring, yes.
Building on that, there's a lot of other, in other contexts, CELTA type programs that have recertification
Oh, yeah.
requirements. And if there were something of that sort, every 2 years you have to send in a video of yourself teaching, and that's evaluated by someone to kind of recert. You have to do an online module, you have to do something to keep up. Some of the CELTA trainings we go through, they don't teach for 2 years after the CELTA. They're in the middle of a program and a bachelor's degree or something, and
Yeah.
they start teaching, and it's gone almost.
Yes, so that could be tied to it. I'm getting the cutthroat signs from the back. Thank you very much, and thank you for your questions. And if you have anything else you want to talk to me about, I'll run outside and you can talk to me. Thank you very much.